This next speaker is special. I've known Andy for a long time, and despite coming from Syracuse, he's got a lot to offer. I learned a lot about New York and New Yorkers and New York buildings with Andy. And I remember walking through some of the poor parts of I think it was the Bronx. He says, well, how come everybody's running away? They think we're they think we're policemen. You're not getting the. I can't tell that joke.
No.
No. All right. Anyway, Andy has his own consulting firm. He's been active in building science and building physics for almost 40 years, and he's got an interesting take on advances in building science that aren't necessarily advances in building science until they fail, and then you get an advance in building science. So please give a warm welcome to my friend Andy Padian.
Thanks, Joe. I thought I was nervous, but I realized it was freezing. It's like 8 below in here. Could hang meat in this place. Today I'm going to talk about technical fixes. And Joe used to do a presentation about the lovely Canadians and how they would screw something up and then have another government program and screw something up. I'm going to talk about government programs all over the place, but a lot of other things. I'm going to bounce around a little bit because I do. I'm going to talk about use and me, and we're going to do some calisthenics. I'm going to talk about some history and some data. I'm going to talk about environmentalism and the use of language, and I hope there's some levity in there. I'm going to talk about science and poor decisions. I was a banker for 10 years, so I am going to talk about finance. I'm going to talk about lessons I've learned and lessons we need to learn. But first off, I like to find out how many engineers are in the room. Please stand up. Well, raise your hand. Stand up. You need the exercise. Okay, sit down. Architects? Okay. You can be seated now. Building scientists. You can be more than one, by the way. Okay. A lot of you think that you're BS. That's good. How many people work for the government? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Utility companies? There's no utility companies in the room. Thank God. 1, 2. I'm going to dish your rear end in a little while, okay. Product reps, suppliers? A bunch of them, yeah, they're paying the bills today. I'm an insultant. Are there insultants or consultants in the room? Okay. Students, university, attached to universities. Duncan, you're a whole bunch of things. That's what I like about you.
Jack of all trades,
and master of none. Yeah. Anybody served in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines? Please. That's what I like to hear. Thank you all for your service. Am I missing something? Builders. How many builders are in the room? Doctors.
Lawyers.
Are there any lawyers in this room? Oh. I'm going to talk about my Irish roots in a minute, but I like in Ireland they call attorneys liars. This is me. I want to talk about me for a little while. I've done over 2,000 ASHRAE Level 2 audits of low-income multifamily buildings. Sandy was a real education for me because 10% of the city was destroyed. And I learned a lot about resilience, and because of that, I did a lot of construction management of resilient stuff, and it went really well and it was fun. For 10 years, I was a banker, and I worked in finance, and I wanted to do that because I wanted to understand how the finance industry handles us. I've worked for private and nonprofit engineering firms. I did work for the government for a while, and I am an consultant, primarily in low-income multifamily. And my last name, Padian, is a Gaelic word, which means doesn't suffer fools well. And as an example of that, I'd like to introduce you to my cousin John, who I haven't seen in about 10 years. And when I saw him recently, he said to me, "You're getting fat." I'm like, "John, I walk 6 miles a day. I go to the gym every day." He's like, "Why don't you try eating less?" And I have my oldest brother is actually a MacArthur genius. I know, the brains ended there, okay. But he was the chief scientist in the Kitzmiller versus Dover area schools district lawsuit, which was intelligent design versus evolution. And he said, "I don't know where people get the idea that evolution is a theory in crisis, or intelligent design is not anywhere a scientific concept. It's not a field of science. It's not being actively researched by anyone. It makes people stupid." He said all these things in court, and if you want, you can see there's a Nova special on it, and he actually appears very smart, even though his last name is Padian. But I want to kind of go to my roots for a minute, and I've lived most of my life in New York. Joe said that I was from Syracuse. I only went to school in Syracuse. This is the idyllic farm that I was born on, and it's actually still there today. The people that owned the farm, I didn't own it, my parents didn't own it, we were tenants on the farm. But the people that owned the farm sold it to the county, the city, and the state. Still this beautiful farmland today. And this is the original house that the family lived in. And I didn't know that the original president of the Continental Congress built that house in 1777. I thought it was the hugest, most beautiful house in the world, but now I'm 6 foot tall, and I can't fit through anything in it. It's, low ceilings, it's built for little people. But this is actually the apartment that we lived in upstairs, and when I went and looked at it recently, it's smaller than my New York City apartment, which I have to walk outside to change my mind. But you'll notice the two green doors to your far left in the picture are barn doors. We lived in an apartment that was above a barn. Yes, I was born above a manger. And my father was not a carpenter, and my mother was not, never mind. I'm of Irish descent, and so I'm going to talk about Ireland for a minute. This is the oldest building in the world, and if you've never seen it, it's the most interesting building in the world. It's called Newgrange. It has one window in the front, and that one window, the sun shines in only 5 days a year. On the winter solstice, 2 days before and 2 days after. And as the sun rises, it shines in that window, reflects off a stone, and lights a burial tomb. It's an absolutely spectacular building. It's older than it's older than the pyramids. It's older than Stonehenge. And for you architects there, it has never leaked a drop of water. And there's no flashing in it, Joe. But I'm of Irish extraction. My grandfather had a rough time when he came from Ireland because these kind of signs were all over the place. And it kind of makes me angry, but what kind of makes me angrier is what I call acceptable stereotyping day, and that is St. Patrick's Day, because everybody thinks it's okay to be a drunken fool on those days, and they blame us. So, and I used to play for Johnny Cash, too. I forgot to say that. Before I knew Joe, though, I was really famous.
You see, here on this show, we deal in a lot of how-tos, how to do this, how to do that, how to make your life more efficient and better quality. And so today we're going to teach you how to buy the right air conditioner. There's a lot more to it than you would think. And here to explain all of this to us is energy conservation specialist Andy Padian. Nice to have you here. Padian, nice to have you. All right. This is an air conditioner. Okay. A big moose of a one, too.
Right. The most important thing that we try to tell people...
That's enough. I was on Regis and Kathy Lee 5 times, and the funniest story is that one time the show opened with the group called 2 Tons of Fun, which changed their name to the Weather Girls, and they sang a song called It's Raining Men. And then I came on. Stay with this because it's brilliant. And then after me was James Brown. So all my friends for years called me the Oreo filling, but let's just leave that alone too. Then I met Joe. And I met Joe at a conference in Chicago in 1989. And we had a little meeting before the session, and he said to me, we had 90 minutes, and he said, look, you talk for the first 30 minutes, and then I'll take the last hour correcting you and telling people the truth. And those were his exact words. And so I knew it was going to be a friendship forever. And in fact, there is a candid photo that was taken of the 2 of us then. And oh yeah. So 26 years ago this week, on August 4, 1997, Ramzi Youssef was being tried for the first World Trade Center bombing. Giuliani was the New York City mayor, and indeed, that day after Louima was accosted by policemen. Gas was $1.29. The average salary was $56K. The minimum wage was $5.15. Clinton and Gore were president. The Yankees were celebrating their 23rd Major League Championship, which they're not going to celebrate this year because they suck. And The Titanic was the #1 movie of the year. Nicholson and Hunt would both win Academy Awards for As Good as It Gets. Yasser Arafat, Helen Thomas, and Wesley Snipes all celebrated a birthday, as did the Queen Mother. But by the end of the month, Diana would be dead. And one of the #1 songs of the year would be Candle in the Wind by Elton John. Roseanne was the #1 TV show, and Tickle Me Elmo was the #1 toy. And then there's our pal Gene. Gene Calmet, 122 years old, 164 days. John Tooley's not here today. He used to date her. But she died on that day, and she's the oldest living human ever. But also on that day, these people got together for the first time, for the first Building Science Camp. And if you're on this list, would you please stand? Wow. The ones in dark are the ones that have passed away. So just trying to put things in perspective here. So now I'm actually going to say something that's somewhat smart, or I'll try to. This is some stuff, history, and why many of us are on the business. I teach a class about energy efficiency to building managers and building superintendents and potential energy auditors of multifamily buildings. And some high school kids from the High School for Green Careers come in and sit in on the class. And I get reviews from everybody after the class. And one of the reviews came from the kids, and this kid really said, "Please be more optimistic. I'm losing hope in society." I was like, wow. So the next week I did the class, and I kind of told them why. I wanted them to know that if you can't remember the past, you're condemned to repeat it. So this was a meeting in New York City at the Hotel Statler. It was the National Association of Science Writers in 1954. And then the head of the Atomic Energy Commission told us, electricity will soon be too cheap to meter. Wrong again, dumbass. This isn't an active shooter drill. This is what we were taught in first grade. Go down and duck and cover. and you will survive a nuclear holocaust. Yeah, right again, government. Then our president was killed. And I kind of feel bad for Carolyn Kennedy because besides her mother dying of old age, she's lost her father and her uncle, and she's my age almost exactly. And how she got through this stuff, I don't have any idea. How we got through him, I don't have any idea. But he did create the EPA, so we'll give him some points there. This isn't a BLM slogan, and this isn't gangster rap. People were writing this music because they were angry. And they were telling us, everything is awful. This is by my pal, Pete Townsend. Oh, and we had a kid crying in the background. Excellent. Then we had this. I don't know how many of you remember. I know there's a bunch of young kids here. That makes me very happy. But I sat in a Volkswagen with the engine off in a sleeping bag in cold weather. And we would push the Volkswagen up to the pump just to get gas. And it kind of makes you think a little bit about energy and the energy problems and crisis. The mayor of New York City at that time was told to drop dead by Jerry Ford, that they weren't going to finance anything. He put together a lovely thing called the Municipal Assistance Corporation, which saved the city and put all these functions in place. But because the city had been through such bad times, he wasn't reelected. Some guy named Koch was elected, and everyone thought that he was a genius, but this guy had set up all the systems for him to be a genius. Just remember when you see a one-term mayor or governor or president, except for a couple, they set the things in place. Like this really nice guy set all the policing tactics and hired a bunch of police, and then some guy named Giuliani came in and took all the credit for it, but that's another story. In 1975, I read this book and it scared the crap out of me. And I actually met the author and I thanked him. I only met him like 5 years ago, but because it told me the price of energy was going to go through the roof, the population was going to double, everything was going to be horrible, we're not going to have enough food to feed people, the waters are going to be bad, we're going to have pollution, we're going to have plastic and garbage everywhere. And it scared me to death. And it encouraged me that I needed to become an environmentalist. Then came Jimmy Carter, and boo all you want, say bad things about him, but most of us in this room have a job today because of him, because he created the Department of Energy, he created the labs, he created the Weatherization Assistance Program, and the Weatherization Assistance Program took all these tools that used to be really expensive and made them really cheap because they were produced in bigger quantities. So let's hear it for Jimmy. This is an actual subway poster that I have, quoting Ronald Reagan saying, "I've included in my morning and evening prayers every day the prayer that the federal government not bail out New York." Jimmy still lost, but it's a great poster, and it's hanging in my house. Then came our Pearl Harbor. And I wasn't in New York City when it happened. I was in Buffalo, New York, and every city that wasn't New York or Washington, that city said, "We're next." And so all these cities were abandoned during the day, and I walked out in Buffalo and it was gone. But anyway, this was a terrible, terrible thing. But if you want to really learn about this, because we don't know what went on there, you know, I mean, we know some stuff, but this book called 102 Minutes was given to me 15 years ago. I'm like, right, I'm going to read this. And I sat down, and it's one of those books that I started reading and took the day off and finished it. So this tells you everything that went on, all the engineering, all the architecture, all of the police miscommunication and fire miscommunication, the engineering and architecture design, and how they just completely went without following any codes because they could. So it's pretty spooky. Oh yeah, then there's this guy. So for the first part, I'd like to point out some things about invitations to doing environmentalism. A Wall Street investor said to me one time when I said I was an environmentalist, he said, too many people call the environment their religion, like many others call their religion and don't follow it. I thought that was pretty good. And Ken Gale is a friend of mine who has a radio show and is a huge environmentalist, and he says, when the air or water are clean, thank an environmentalist. If not, become one. Enough said. So, two environmentalists are walking along the beach. This isn't a joke. And they see this. And the one environmentalist says, oh my God, the starfish, they're all gonna die. Why are you gonna die? And the other one reached down and grabbed a starfish and tossed it into the ocean. And he said, that one's happy. And I think in our job, we need to handle everything one starfish at a time. And you'll see today I have a few starfish here. There's people in my neighborhood that are spray painting this on the sidewalks. Just a reminder. How many environmentalists in the room? Please stand up. It's a trap. You're right. Come on, stand up if you're an environmentalist. The question will come. How many of you that are standing compost your food waste? Okay, you miss it. This is my little community garden in New York City, and I compost my food waste because I'm an environmentalist. And that's a container that I invented that's really an outdoor garbage can that I didn't put the bottom piece in and drilled a bunch of holes in it, and you just dump stuff in it, and it keeps the animals out, but everything just decomposes in it, and when the fall comes, I just pick it up, the compost dumps into the garden, and I turn it over. It's a very simple design. But if food waste were a country, it would be the third highest emitter of greenhouse gases on the earth, behind only China and the United States. So it's stuff that I have to think about. But I think about this stuff all the time because I was challenged by a couple of friends of mine that work in sanitation and a couple of friends of mine that work in resource recovery, sewers, I mean. They said, you're not an environmentalist. You don't watch how much you throw out. So for a year, I watched how much I threw out. And I weighed everything. And apparently, to be good, you should only be throwing out about 25% of stuff. You should recycle all your paper and cans and everything like this. So I was down to 19.4%. But actually, that year was also the year that I cleaned up all of my photographs and film from years ago that I didn't, even recognize people in anymore. And you can't throw that out. You can't burn it. You can't recycle it. There's nothing you can do with it. So that was almost 20% of my waste that year was just photos that I threw out. But still, I have environmentalists come to my house and stay, and they throw out the paper towel, the paper toilet holder. Really? You can't understand that's a piece of paper? Okay, I have issues, let's face it. I have some language issues. This is the Brooklyn Museum in Brooklyn, and I was there the other day, and Brooklyn is a just every race, color, and creed on the planet live in Brooklyn. And I'm walking there, and I see this sign out front, and it says, yo. I'm like, wow, isn't that a nice, word to all of my brothers and sisters? And then when I was coming back, it said, oi. So we do speak to many. This is my friend Stephen. He's 92 years old, and he's in Ireland, and he's a great cook, and he lived in New York City not far from me years ago. And he was cooking me dinner one night, and I said, Stephen, what's in the chicken? And he said, mixed herbs. And I said, what herbs? And he said, mixed herbs. And I said, what herbs? He said, mixed herbs. I'm trying, instead of cursing from now on, I'm trying to say, mixed herbs. Mixed herbs. Gulf had a gas many years ago, and it was called no-nox. It's not that there wasn't nitrogen oxides in it. It was that when you had a four-cylinder car that didn't go very well, it would stop the car from making a banging noise as you went along, what we used to call a car knocking. So there was their no-knocks, different language. This is a really interesting presentation I saw last year here. Mark and Jared did a wonderful thing of telling us how we're going to move from electrification, how we're going to move into electrification and decarbonization. And it was a fabulous presentation because they said everything they needed to do along the way. And it was very organized. But each thing had to do along the way to get to complete decarbonization was a jump over the Grand Canyon. Like they said, well, first we've got to fix the grid. Really? What a good idea, you know? Then we have to train 500,000 people on how to install this stuff. Oh, okay, that's another really good idea. But the most interesting thing they said that day, and this has been confirmed by a few other people to me, was that when New York State was getting into like this huge plan to decarbonize and electrification, the plumbers union was completely against it because they said, absolutely not, we're not going to do this. And they went up to Albany and they complained, and the governor's office said to them, what's wrong? He said, there's no job for plumbers here. It's electrification. It's only electricians. And the governor's office had to explain to them that there was stuff in electrification that involved plumbing. That's why they started calling it decarbonization instead of electrification. So it's a language thing. I'm going to talk about steam because it's a system that it still exists in a lot. I was talking to a couple of people last night about steam systems, and I'm going to talk a little about history so you can understand the institutional and technical barriers that we've had to get through with systems. Brockton, Mass. Is only about an hour south of here. And on March 19th, 1905, this building was a beautiful building, and it was a shoe company. And the next day it looked like this, because the steam boiler at the Grover Company ripped through the 4-story wooden building, igniting a gas fuel fired and raced through the building. The blast and fire killed 56 people that day. But the beauty of it was that the boiler actually flew hundreds of yards to the boiler engineer's house. That's the story I've been told, and I'm going with it. But what this did, before the Red Sox and the Yankees were around, Boston and New York didn't like each other. And I'll say right now, they still don't. How many Red Sox fans are in the room? Yeah, okay, great. All 6 of you. Fine. But the midpoint between Boston and New York was Hartford. And that's where the insurance industry got together. It's really true. In 1810, the Hartford Fire Insurance Company was found there. And in fact, President Lincoln's house in Illinois was insured by the Hartford Fire Insurance Company. And the Hartford Steam Boiler Inspection Insurance Company is still around today. And they got together with the guys from New York and Boston, and they said, we need to have some standards about steam. So they got together and they did things like this. Now, I don't know if all of you understand steam, but it's a system that doesn't have any pumps, if it works right. And so the steam rises, and then it heats the place, and then it condenses and goes back down. But it goes along that pipe on the ground that's called a wet return. But if that wet return leaks, the water comes out of the boiler, and the boiler dry fires, and it's destroyed. So the Hartford Insurance Company designed this little loop in the back that's called the Hartford Loop that stopped a lot of dry firing. Very, very simple thing, except we came along to screw it up. We had coal boilers. And when we had coal boilers, the basement was always dry because it's a big fire and it's on all the time. But as soon as we switched from coal to oil or gas, the boiler wasn't on all the time. So all of a sudden, the dirt floors started being wet. and people didn't know what to do about it. So they paved the basements. And in doing so, they paved over the wet return. So you couldn't see if the wet return was leaking. Then we installed a low water cutoff so that if the water was getting low in the boiler, it would shut the boiler off. But that made the super lazy, and he didn't go to check on stuff. Then we made it even worse. We added a low water cutoff and an automatic fill so we wouldn't have any idea how much was leaking in the boiler. Then we'd go back and say, well, I'll tell you what, we've got all these safety controls. Let's add a water meter so we can see how much water we're leaking out of these boilers. It's like, and nobody reads the meter. So we're constantly inventing a different problem to make things worse. But we've learned our lessons. Oops. I was a block away from here when this explosion happened in Gramercy Park. And because I was scatterbrained that day, as I am most days, I skipped my block and I walked up 2nd Avenue instead of 3rd. If I had been walking up 3rd Avenue, just about when I got here, this explosion would have happened, and I'm not exaggerating a bit. I was the first one on the scene. This wasn't a cell phone camera. This was a Canon FT-QL 35 millimeter. And I have all these pictures and people like, this stuff was crazy. This is crazy. I mean, one of the people that died on the scene was working on a steam pipe and he was vaporized. They found nothing of him. And so Con Edison snapped into action and they set up a public relations tent. And on my way home from the baseball game that night, I said to the person in the public relations tent, hey, was there any asbestos on that pipe? Absolutely, positively not. None. Don't be concerned. I lived a half a block away from here. 5 years later, oops, there was some asbestos. Yeah, they dumped as much asbestos as the same amount of asbestos as we had in the 2 World Trade Center explosions and building loss. And the Con Ed truck just the other day said to me, you know, you should switch to CFLs. And I'm thinking, well, CFLs are really hard to find now. I'm going to take out all my LEDs. This was still on the outside of the Con Ed truck this year. Okay. And there's a whole bunch of this do as I say, not as I do stuff going on. Like in New York City, these are like 0.1% of the local laws we have to follow to own a building and run a building, and a lot of them involve energy and efficiency and telling people how much energy you use and all of these local laws. And I went to the training center that gets a lot of money from the city to train people in this. And I went to pee and it told me, please hold the flush button down for 10 seconds. I'm like, you guys can't afford a low flush toilet. You can't, these kind of things drive me nuts. States are suing the EPA and telling all you people and all us people in the Northeast, no, you can't have your fire anymore. You can't have a log and a fire because they're dangerous and there's smoke and there's all that stuff. Meanwhile, New York City is telling us, I can't have pizza ovens. In New York City. What? Pizza. New York City. Mark, for the first time ever, we've agreed. He said that's going too far. Okay. Meanwhile, this is a strange contradiction in terms. It is a Manhattan cooperative apartment. And one of the guys that lives in here is the guy that was responsible for telling everyone they had to get off heavy oil, medium weight oil, number 2 oil, and convert to gas. And he yelled at people in settings like this. His building was still burning number 6 oil while he was yelling at us, and that's residual oil. So remember coal? Yeah, coal. So I saw my last coal boiler, I think in 1984, and the guy that was shoveling coal into it in a multifamily building didn't want to get rid of it. We were giving him an oil boiler, and he didn't want to have any. He liked Bessie was the name of his boiler. And he liked Bessie, and he liked shoveling coal, and it was okay. So 84 was the last time I saw a coal boiler in a multifamily building, because they were banned. Oh, except in New York City schools, because in 2000, in New York City schools, they were saying, well, you know, sometimes we still have to use coal, so if you see ash cans outside, that's us. No, no, no. It was long after that, because I found this in my neighborhood, you know, taped up on the wall. I grabbed that right away. So don't always do as they say. Here's the one that kills me. If you eat food in the Northeast, it probably came, a lot of it came from Hunts Point. The Hunts Point meat fish market, the Hunts Point vegetable market, it's gigantic. And there's trucks pulling all in it on all hours of the day and night. And people really in that area have very, very high asthma and cancer rates and all that. But, you know, here's all these markets dishing stuff out. But here's the Hunts Point produce market, which probably produces or ships most of the produce in the Northeast. And if you look on Avenue F, Avenue G, Avenue H, Avenue J, there's 1,000 idling trucks, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And even though there's huge flat roof space around there, there's no solar. And there's no plugs for these trucks to just shut off the diesel and plug their compressors into a plug so that they can run and less pollution every day. Meanwhile, methane dumping all over the place, because in resource recovery facilities, I mean sewage waste treatment plants, they're venting methane all the time. And it's a lower grade of methane than the gas company gives us, but it works. And why couldn't the methane in Hunts Point in the Bronx be put in a pipe and shipped somewhere and maybe make a little electricity using combined heat and power and ship that over to where the trucks are, so the trucks aren't running on diesel? 1,000 of them at a time, 24 hours a day. Mark said something pretty funny, that sometimes you take an extra half hour to learn something and it really helps you. So I'd like to show a few examples of that. I moved to New York City a long time ago, and the very first thing I did, because I wanted to be an energy nerd, was I joined the Metropolitan Solar Energy Society. We had them. And I went right up to the president, I introduced myself, and he's like, what do you want to do? I said, I want to put solar on buildings in New York City. And he looked at me, because I was a recent graduate of Syracuse University, and I had a degree in energy and environmental policy, you know. And he looked at me and he said, wouldn't you rather make the buildings more energy efficient first, so solar will pick up more of the load? It's like, who is this guy? Wow. His name was Bill Bobenhausen. I'll come back to him in a minute. Bill Bobenhausen. Anyone know him? Oh, great guy. He's passed. So he became one of my first mentors, and poor guy had to put up with me. I'm probably one of the reasons why he's dead today. But in 1982, I was working for the New York City Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development, and I read this article in a magazine called New Shelter. And it was about two Canadians that figured out that if you went into the attic of a house, found the holes and sealed them, that it makes the house really efficient. And so I went up in the attic in October, in my parents' house at that time. We had moved from the farm. And I went up, and it took like 20 tubes of caulk and some high temperature caulk and some tin and some plastic bags and a little bit of wood and some sealant and a case and a half of beer. But over a weekend, I did a pretty good job of air sealing the attic, because you can find the holes with the pink stuff by looking for the black stuff around the pink stuff and seal the holes. So my parents' gas bill went down 40%. And my dear deceased dad, who was a Kennedy Democrat and became a Reagan Republican, was accused by the gas company of stealing gas. And he had to say, my son made our house more energy efficient. He's an energy expert. So I hadn't been on Regis yet, so he didn't know. He actually didn't know that I was an energy expert. The gas company went after him, and they ended up finding out that the meter hadn't been tampered with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, 10 years later, one of the regulars here, who I begged to stay here last night, Michael Blasnick, wrote this fantastic little book from the Grassroots Alliance for a Solar Pennsylvania, or GRASP. I still have a copy of it. If anybody wants it, I have it digitally. And it very simply told people that owned flat roofs how to make them more energy efficient by air sealing and stuffing them on the flat parts where you can't get in. And it was a great little book. It might have been 12 pages. And these are the cartoon type figures they have. But Philadelphia changed the way they did roofs. And all of us, Joe and Thule and all of us, we met Blasnick when he was wet behind the ears, and we were there yelling at this guy, and he was telling us about roof temperatures, because he had put sensors on the underside of the roof when he was like 19 years old, and painting them white really made a difference. And we were like, who is this kid? Anyway, he's kind of smart today. Because if you go to roofs, they leak. There's holes in roofs. This is a dumbwaiter shaft. You don't see them around too much, but they help people move stuff up and down in buildings. If you take a dumbwaiter shaft and you put your hand over it when it's 30 degrees out and you're a human being, it's the same temperature. So it's venting heat out of the building. More on this in a minute. There's all kinds of heat pouring out of the tops of buildings. This is an actual designed passive vent at the top of a building, which caused all of the hallways to dump smell into the hallways. So the hallways in this building stunk like crap all the time. You ever seen this? They're the Hollywood lights. Yeah, we used to see these all the time. And I don't wear makeup, even though I live in Hell's Kitchen. But women that wear makeup tell me that if they put makeup on under these lights, it would literally melt off their faces. It's generating that much heat. And I would see stuff like this in buildings all the time. This picture was taken in a master metered building. So the owner was paying for this. The owner was also paying for this. Please read at the top. It says, warning, risk of fire. Use 60-watt lamp max. Not one, two. So you see these kind of things, and Mark was talking about little fly farts that he's stopping, getting around in a building. I'm nailing boards over holes. Catastrophic waste. Amory Lovins is one of my heroes. And he came to New York in the 80s and he said, everybody should convert all of their lights to compact fluorescent. And at the time, compact fluorescents looked like this. But remember how the plumbers kind of screwed stuff up in New York? The electricians said, that's a fixture. And if you're not an electrician, you can't install it. These were illegal in New York City and could only be purchased by electricians. And then the electrician could come at today, prevailing wage in New York City for an electrician. How much? How much? 62. 175. Tell your kids to become electricians and move to New York. So I had to provide this stupid guide for owners that bulbs cost this much and they last this long and this is how much energy they use, and this was too hard for them because it was a word problem. So I simplified it to This is how much it costs per day to run it when they're 24 hours a day. And then I started getting owners to buy LEDs, and they got it. I have to take a breather for a moment. I looked at a lot of buildings over the years. This is more stuff that I was paid to learn. And if you look all the way to your left, the average single-family home in America is somewhere between 3 and 5 BTUs per square foot per heating degree day, and the little bar below it is how much they use for hot water, about 75-25. And that's, a lot of data. But then we looked at low-income families in New York State, and they use 3 times as much. Well, why would families use 3 times as much? It's BTUs per square foot per heating degree day. It's what? It's per square foot. Why? Okay, that's not the answer.
Crappier housing.
What? Crappier housing? Yeah, okay. What else?
Open windows. They're home all day.
I'm sorry, who said that? They're home all day. It's 3 family, they're working 4 shifts and 5 shifts. Somebody works the night shift, somebody works the day shift. So they're working more often and the heat stays on. That's a lot of the picture in single family. In multifamily, in low income, where the owners pay the bills, that's the third one over. I looked at thousands of buildings and they were up around 15 to 20 BTUs per square foot per heating degree day. And they used about the same amount of energy to heat as hot water because the apartments are crowded. But then I looked at buildings that were brand new and gut rehabbed by the city of New York. And that's the middle bar. 8 times the energy of a single family house. And that's because of this phenomenon called value engineering. And what the city of New York called value engineering at that time is taking stuff out. So they would take out the valves on the radiators, because those were expensive. They would take out the night setback control on the boiler. So the buildings, the only way, is Henry Gifford here yet? The only way that, this is a copyrighted term of Henry Gifford, the only way that people could control the heat is using the double hung zone valve. And then the next bar over is middle income multifamily is significantly more efficient because it's in better shape and they turn the heat back a little bit better. But then in the early aughts, we did the first Energy Star multifamily building in New York City. And the owner, the developer, claimed it cost him $1.36 more per square foot to build than the big group in the middle. And they were super efficient. And nothing serious done. None of the stuff that we're talking about here. This is the thing that really scared me. By the way, this graph got me a job in the bank. Because they said, oh, you want to know something? We don't know shit. I wasn't supposed to say that. I apologize. So we started looking at 750 buildings across New York State. And they either heat with oil or gas. Multifamily. Centrally heated. And guess what? Their water bill is bigger than their gas or oil bill. In each building. In almost every building, the water bill is double that of gas or oil. So investing in toilets gives cash flow to make the other improvements. Crazy talk. And owners just want the water rates reduced. I just want to buy toilets. This is easy stuff. I was here in 2009, and I asked all of you, I deal with bankers. You need to tell me case studies. Please send them to me when you have success stories. Nobody did. I hate you all. You're a bunch of bums. But I started doing them. And we did this little tiny retrofit in this engineering building that was built in 1873 and converted to senior housing. The boilers stunk. We changed the boilers. The attic looked like it was insulated by the New York City Ballet with fiberglass like this, just strewn all over creation. And so we air sealed it and insulated it and changed the boilers. We didn't get the historic preservation people screaming at us, because people always tell me, you can't do anything with an historic preservation building. It's a bunch of crap. And we cut 22% of the gas use in the building. This is a big, leaky building. A lot more to do, but we're getting ready. That's one starfish. Whoop. This is the Auburn Housing Authority, and those of you that are architects in the room know this style of architecture is early modern Eisenhower bomb shelter. And buildings all over the place. And Auburn is near Syracuse, and it rains a lot. None of these buildings had gutters. None. So we installed gutters and moved the water away from the building, and those 1950 furnaces that you can see down there, the building staff spent most of their time manufacturing parts for those furnaces that couldn't be found in the market anymore. So we changed the furnaces, we changed the hot water, it's still master metered, so, the housing authority pays for everything, but because of these improvements, the vacancy rate went from 20% to 3% overnight, because everybody said, hey man, these apartments are great now. They fixed them up, So this is the kind of win. And we got 26% reduction in heating gas, and 58% reduction in hot water use. This is like big money. I knew that it was a home run because the head of the housing authority wrote us a 2-page thank you letter. You don't get that too often. This is a building that we made heat pump ready. Individually metered. We sent a blower door crew in. We tightened up every apartment. We fixed the ventilation in every unit. We didn't give them new windows, but we gave them a super efficient hot water maker. I made a really, really big mistake in this building. I don't want to say who it was run by, but it was the Archdiocese. And I walked in, and you'll have to excuse my French for a minute. I looked at that boiler there, and there was an old dusty one. And then there was a brand new one that was exactly the same. And I looked at it and I said, what stupid asshole specified this? And the engineer behind me said, I did. And I had to explain to him that there's more efficient units on the market. Anyway, he still likes me, kinda. This is the Syracuse Housing Authority building. Again, it's master metered, so you can't really figure out what meter goes to what building. But overall, we had about 23% reduction in heating usage, and we did the same stuff, Another starfish. Whoop, back in the water. This all revolves around financing. And I worked for a bank for 10 years. And it's a difficult crowd. These are the issues in financing. Don't ask a loan officer to do 4th grade math. They can't do it. Hey, this building pays $100,000 a year for oil, and we're going to cut it 50%. How much is that? Hold on, let me get my spreadsheet. It's that hard for them. One of the I love this guy to death because he was a banker and a bartender at night, so I could see him all the time. But he actually said to me one day, when I was telling him, about buildings and how much energy they use, he said to me, if you say BTUs per square foot per heating degree day for me one more time, I'm going to kill you. He said, just give me a grade. Let me know how everything is. When my kid's report card comes home, I read it. So we did a report card style thing for owners that said your water use is D, your common area use is F, your hot water use is D. And owners understood that. Because we dumbed it down for them. Now they give everything in total BTUs per square foot, and nobody knows what they're talking about because it's owners that look at this stuff. I took a class at the NYU Stern School. I took a graduate level course because it's an internationally renowned business school, and I wanted to learn about commercial loans and how to refinance. And the teacher was teaching one day, and he's internationally renowned, and he said, when you do projections, always say, the energy use, the cost of energy and water is going to go up 5% a year, every year. And I raised my hand and I said, what if, sir, someone invests in energy efficiency and cuts that down? And he told me and an entire group of future CPAs and Wall Street people, that stuff doesn't work. I said, well, I have some... That stuff doesn't work. Next. The banking industry doesn't believe us. And consumers a little better than the banking industry, believe me. I walked up to a building in Rochester and an owner met me at the door with his arms folded. I was working for the bank. And he said, I'm going to quote him directly, so please excuse me, I ain't doing any of that green shit. And I walked through the building with him. And I showed him that there were massive holes in the basement that led all the way to the top. And all of his toilets and shower heads and aerators were the wrong kind. So if he spent about $400 per unit and the super would do all the work, he'd save about $1,000 per apartment per year. And he liked that. And so he bought in right away. So when you talk to somebody in that manner, it kind of works. But most owners are just Windows, 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 Windows. I know some of you manufacture Windows, and I know there's much better Windows today. But the ads in the paper that tell me all the time, you know, Windows save 40%. Yeah, if you didn't have any Windows beforehand. The problem is that we don't have any financing packagers. We don't have anybody to explain this to the average person, like what's the difference between a tax credit, a deduction, a depreciation, a grant, or a loan? Is the tax credit refundable? I asked somebody this the other day, and they're like, what are you talking about? You know, so nobody knows this stuff. So I hired an intern, freshman in college. Oh, I went to desireusa.org. That's supposed to be the source. I defy you to understand it. It doesn't separate commercial from institutional, from wherever. It's just, I saw 80 tax credits for my New York City, 80 tax incentives for my New York City apartment, and none of them was I eligible for because they didn't separate commercial from residential, whatever. But I got a freshman in college to do a PowerPoint presentation that figured everything out. And I gave it to the state of New York, and I said, why don't you turn this into some sort of flowchart? That's too much work. They can't do it. Okay, this is almost the last part. I'm trying to decarbonize. It's hard. I got buildings that are really, really, really tough to do. And I'm going to show you a few of them. And they're big, and they're little, and they're complex, and they're not. But a lot of it is psychology. First, exterior insulation. This is how not to insulate a flat roof. And Joe, pay attention because you may not have ever seen this before or learned this. A lot of flat roofs are fully vented. In New York City, it was a very common thing in multifamily buildings in the 30s and 40s. So the energy audit by the experts that did this building said, you need to insulate the roof. So they did a beautiful job of putting a $1.1 million rigid system on the roof that was perfectly installed. But they kept all the turbine vents in place. In fact, they added a few and lubricated all of them so they would work a little better. So what you have here is a renewable energy roof cavity depressurization system. I got to teach this? We need instructions for installing insulation. There was a state program to encourage owners to decarbonize existing units. Chris, do you know about this state program? Okay, never mind. And so they wanted people to super insulate and air seal and add ventilation and do heat pumps as part of rehab in multifamily buildings. And the people that ran the program said to me, I said to them, there's no incentive levels and there's no specifications. So owners won't know what to do. You need to help them because they're not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And they said to me, owners know how to do this. You don't speak to low-income owners. I've been speaking to low-income owners for 30 years, 40 years. The next thing they told me was, owners have engineering and architecture expertise. And I said to them, look, there's this company in Massachusetts, Building Science Corporation. They'll help you. Pay them. There's this company in New York. It's called Stephen Winter Associates. Pay them. There's this company on the Lower East Side. It's called Chris Benedict. Pay them. Please have somebody design. No. Owners will run to this program. No incentives, no specifications. 2 owners went to this program. One owner, it was jammed down the architect's throat. Right, Chris? And the other owner, I don't know. But this was all coming about, and I was saying to them, you should do this, and you should give people, like, how to do this safely. This kind of changed their mind a little bit. And it changed a lot of owners' minds. And guess what? We're not perfect. Who knew? So next is air sealing. And we've all seen this before, where you go up into an attic. In this particular attic, I poked my head up, and I said 3 very unfortunate terms back to back, and it wasn't mixed herbs. But these people just started telling you, what's wrong? I'm like, your attic's a complete mess. And indeed, this is a beautiful house on the Hudson River just south of Poughkeepsie, and my friends own it, and it's fabulous. And the energy auditor came, and he was a pretty good guy. Like, he's one of these guys that when he came in the door, he said, this house is going to be $4,800 at $50. And he was on the button, and he knew where the leaks were and everything like that. But we both identified that the attic was the problem, and that we needed to fix the attic. So the building is 50%, they didn't design this house. An architect called Helen Keller designed the house. 50% of the building is heated, oil hydronic, and the rest of the oil is used to make hot water and put in storage tanks. The rest of the house is electric resistance. And you can't figure out which is which and what is where, and it would take me hours to figure it out. Their electric bill is $10,000 a year. Their oil bill is $10,000 a year. The attic is 100% connected to the house. I know because I have a digital micromanometer. And I threw it up there, and it's like the same. Okay. So the most cost-effective thing to do is to air seal the attic. Solar was very cost-effective in this house because they have a big electric load, and there's huge tax credits. So air sealing and solar. Heat pumps, $43,000. A tax credit. It's a lot of dough. And the proposal from the energy auditing company said, keep the oil and keep the strip electric, but we'll put in heat pumps. They're like, and the owners don't know what to do. So, you know what they're going to do? Air seal and solar, because that's all they understand. The rest of it is junk science. This is an historic, get ready for this, low-income cooperative in the South Bronx that was built probably in the early 1900s, but it was vacant for years and made into a cooperative. And every 3-unit building, this is, if you look to the left, that's the site plan for the block, and where each building is, the ones that are that have numbers on them are part of the cooperative. But they all have atmospheric gas boilers, and they have, if you look at the map all the way to the right, that's what the floor plan looks like. So there's room to put heat pumps, there's room to put heat pump water heaters, there's room to do all this stuff, but it's a low-income cooperative. So the state will give us like, I mean, everybody in the building are categorically eligible for like weatherization. So the weatherization agency came in, and the state money came in, and I came in, and the cooperatives wouldn't even meet with us. They didn't want to hear about this. They just wanted windows. And that's it. And they wouldn't talk to us because it's sophistication. And it's all new stuff to them. And then there's this 600-unit multifamily building in Brooklyn, and I do an energy audit to it, and it really needs a lot of work done on the ventilation system to, reuse the heat and put a heat recovery system in and change all the lighting and put thermostatic radiator valves on everything, and we'd probably drop the energy use in this building by 40%. So there's another starfish that I tossed back into the water. But the state of New York insultant, and I called this person an insultant because it was an insult that they asked me. They said, "Can you do heat pumps here?" And I said, "No, I don't think so, because there isn't enough electric load and all this stuff." They said, "Could you do geothermal?" And I said, "Yes, if we drill down to magma. Or have this kind of electric system hanging on the side of the building." Okay. There are some institutional barriers here. If you have a rental unit that doesn't pay for heat or domestic hot water or electricity, there's no system in New York City that says how much you get back if you switch the heating. And in any city, state, or federal area that has any kind of rent stabilization or control system, you can't do this. I can't put an electric stove in my apartment because my apartment can't handle it. God forbid I try to put a heat pump in. So that's not going to happen. The electric and gas utilities are overwhelmed by requests like mad. And so people in the construction industry in New York City say to me, the number one thing that slows construction in New York City is Con Edison. Can't get gas, can't get electric. Electricity is really expensive. And I've been buying renewable energy for 30 years, but I get what Con Ed gives me, and it's 71% carbon. And a lot of my work is psychology. Training a workforce is kind of tough. Who leads the league in trade education in the United States? Does anybody know? Who's number one in training people in the trades? He's third. The military. And thank you again for your service. Henry isn't here yet, unfortunately. Henry Gifford has a multifamily building in Texas, and he tried to get them to install heat pumps in his building. And not one installer he spoke with owned a torque wrench. He kind of thought that was needed to install everybody's heat pump. We had some very high electric costs in the Northeast. These are numbers from 2 years ago. And we lose a lot of energy lost in conversion. And this is a New York Times thing that I'm very fond of looking at a lot, but this is what our national electricity is in coal and oil and gas and everything else. And this is what it looks like in New York State. And this is what it looks like in New Jersey. And this is what it looks like in Connecticut. Woohoo! And thank you, Vermont. You're the only ones. The only ones in the country. But you're really pissing off the Native Americans. Because every time we build a hydroelectric dam, somewhere it's taking land that isn't owned by us, that we took away other land from them and moved them. So there's a lot of complaints about hydro. And what about natural gas bans? This isn't me. This is a research group at the University of California at Berkeley says regulators can mandate and ban natural gas for new buildings, but without additional policy and rate reform, California's high electric prices mean that electrification mandates raise costs for households. What are you going to do for poor folk? I just want everyone to adjust the message a little. I was listening to this NPR show called Science Friday, and it's a pretty good show because it takes science and makes it kind of stupid so I can understand it. But there's guys talking about a house in Montana, and they bring the Montana Weatherization Program, and they bring a incredibly sophisticated person from the University of California at Santa Barbara, who of course knows a lot of stuff about housing in Montana. And they bring, Science Friday guy in, and not once do they say the word efficiency, retrofit, insulation, duct sealing, attic insulation, attic bypasses. It's just electrification, electrification, electrification. All they need is heat pumps. I really like Bill McKibben, but he spent an hour on a radio program called the United States of Anxiety, appropriately named, talking about what we have to do in energy policy in the United States. And he didn't use the word efficiency once. It was electric cars, it was heat pumps, it was electrification, and, excuse me, it wasn't building science, but it was BS. NPR went crazy when one of the national labs did a fusion reaction, and it was about enough energy to make a pot of tea. But they went crazy over it. And one of the people called in to the NPR show and said, but wait, if we're investing all this money in fusion, is the government going to stop investing in solar? And I said, do you know that the amount they invest in fusion is 1 billion times more than what they've been investing in solar for the last 40 years? Like, there's no money at the federal end, comparatively speaking, on efficiency and alternatives as there is on oil and gas and nuclear. And don't get me started on what the people at Fox say. So I want us all to adjust the message. First, we're all environmentalists here, and we want to reduce energy use. And when we do this, we reduce carbon. And the most environmental way to do this is through efficiency. What we used to call the negawatt. And none of this means that we're opposed to decarbonization, and I've been called a hater of heat pumps. I'm not. But I got a lot of little starfish, and I'm chucking them one at a time. And we'll get there. But it's guys like me and a bunch of you here in this audience. We have to have our own Obi-Wan. And my first Obi-Wan was Bill Bobenhausen. And he was the one that said to me, why don't we do efficiency first? I'm glad you know Bill. And one night, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was in a meeting where we used to do these meetings for kids getting into the energy field and told them where to go in the energy field, not where to go. And these 2 kids came up to me. And they said, Mr. Padian, we want to do solar in buildings in Brooklyn. And I said to them, wouldn't it be a better idea if you invested in efficiency first so the buildings would have a smaller load and the solar picked up more of the load? And these kids said to me, that's brilliant. And I realized that I had snatched the lightsaber out of the hands of Obi-Wan. And I was now Luke Skywalker. And the Force was with me. And literally, 10 minutes later, my phone rang. and a friend of mine said, Bill Bobenhausen died today. These are giants. There's giants in this room. I've learned a lot from these people and people in this room. I've learned a lot of stuff from people who aren't in this room. But all I got to tell you is we, as nerds, have to educate more people. We have to get the dark side of the Force out of here. And we have to do all of the good stuff that we've been doing. And we've got to keep it up. Thank you.
We do have time for questions.
But the best way to get a good review is let everybody get to lunch early. If you didn't hear the question, Local Law 97 is this law that says that you got to meet certain energy standards in buildings, and if you don't, they're going to fine you. People are going to find out the hard way that controlling their buildings in every possible way, and that includes the boilers, the hot water makers, and the ventilation system. But very little air sealing gets done. And honestly, in a lot of old New York City buildings that have been painted 100 times, you would be shocked how tight those apartments are. So I'm not too concerned about that, but, you know, yeah.
Andy, over here.
Okay.
So I had a teacher once that said, old ladies don't like heat pumps. Do you stand by that statement today?
I actually have an entire senior citizen group of old ladies that I converted their buildings from electric through-the-wall heaters to electric heat pumps, and they wanted to kill me. But this was in the 90s when heat pumps really stunk. So, you know, little old ladies don't like cold. And I'm becoming a little old lady. I'm freezing in here.
Fools rush in. So you mentioned windows quite a few times, and I'm asking you, is there a place in your way of thinking for interior storms applied to really crappy windows?
The question, well, did everybody hear the question? It's interior storms versus new windows. The fire department in New York City hates interior storms. Don't piss off a fireman in New York. So I'm sure there's a place for them, and we have been installing now better fiberglass windows in New York City. They finally got fiberglass past the buildings department. So you can install a pretty good window in New York City, but let's do the thermostatic radiator valves first, you know, and let's do some targeted air sealing. And nail, in every single building I go into that's a multifamily building, anywhere in the country, I'm walking around and I'm looking for the hole that I have to nail the board over. Because there's a big problem in every building. And you know it before you get in there, you know, the oil use, the gas use, the water use, and you aim for that. So maybe is the answer.
All right. Well, thank you for that non-controversial, boring presentation that you're famous for.
I try to be a calm, you know, unopinionated New Yorker.
You could just say you're a New Yorker. Thank you, Andy.
Thank y'all.
All right, lunch. See you back at 1 o'clock.
I'm a big fan.